Welcome back to the Discover podcast, where we view faith as a discovery journey with Jesus to help you become the person God created you to be. Welcome back to this episode of the Discover podcast. Today I'm sitting down with Evan Hayes, who's a member of our church, as he talks about how, as he looks back on his story, he's able to see God's faithfulness all along the way. So if you're in a season of you're saying, like, God, where are you? Hopefully his story will help you see that God is present with us, that he is always faithful to us, even through the hard things of life. So enjoy this conversation with Evan Hayes. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to this episode of the Discover podcast. I'm sitting here with Evan Hayes, who's been coming to our church for a while. So, Evan, I'm going to go ahead and just let you introduce yourself and tell all of our listeners and viewers who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Evan Hayes, and we started coming to the church, my wife Amy and I, and now we have two kids. In the summer of 2021, became members in spring of 2022. So it's hard to believe it's been this long already. But yeah, kind of sort of still in the middle of the pandemic, which made it a little harder to get to know folks at first, but probably people might know my wife more. She's very active in tapestries, but we also lead a neighborhood community. And so that's on every Friday night. And this is our second year of doing that now.
Yeah. Now, one of the ways that people can find you guys is the thing that I've been like the most impressed by is you guys walk everywhere. You are a walking family.
Yes. Yeah. And I was actually talking to Monty about that before because he lives even closer than we do. And he's like, yeah, I actually did walk today. My wife walks pretty much every week. I mean, if it's nasty out, she won't. Yeah. But yeah, we do walk a lot.
Did he say that like kind of like a little brag, like I walked today? And then you come in with your like, yeah, let me tell you how far we walked to get here.
A little bit. Yes. A little bit like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Anyway, so great to have you join us. And so why don't we just jump in? What we've been doing with these episodes is just letting people tell their story. And usually the natural starting point is just kind of how you came to faith. What was that season of life like for you? And then we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think I'd really like to start with my baptism, and I know people have different perspectives on this, and that's completely fine. But I was baptized as an infant. My father was a pastor for his whole career, and baptized me in our house actually because it was a church plant that didn't even have a building yet at the time. And I think a theme that I'd like to speak some about today is just God's faithfulness, and I see it going back even to that time, and I don't credit it to myself at all. It's God's faithfulness, and so a few years later, and I know it seems really young, but I have distinct memories of this, and my mother as well. I was like 3.5, and we were just driving to the grocery store, in the middle of the day, and my sister probably was in the car seat. She was really tiny at the time. And I don't know what got me thinking about it, but I asked my mother, why do people do bad things? And if you actually think about that, like, that is kind of a significant question.
Totally.
And so she explained to me about sin and how it came into the world and how we all are sinners. And I said, okay, well, what can I do about that? And she said, well, we can pray about it and ask Jesus to come take away your sin. And, let's finish our shopping. Let's go back home. And I was like, no, I don't want to have sin in me. And let's pray now. Yeah. And so credit to her. She kept it together. I'm sure she probably wanted to start breaking out in tears, but she was driving, so she had to hold it together. And we kind of prayed, and so that was kind of the official start of it. But it's a long journey of faith, and so I think growing up as I was in my teenage years, starting to take it more personally. I went to an Acquire the Fire conference. I don't know if you went to any of those, and that was really inspiring to get me to read the Bible myself, to repent of my sins. And I mentioned in the email that I sent to you that my parents had a thing where I had to read the Bible through before I could get my driver's license.
Brilliant.
So, got to get this on the podcast. Any parents out there, you're welcome to use this. It took me 3 years. I started when I was 13, but I did get it done. And so just gradually finding ways to make it more my own, went on some missions trips with my youth group in high school and things like that. So I would say, my parents were very formative in my faith. They both have always taken their faith very seriously, and just the role of the Bible in my family's life. I grew up in a United Methodist church, but it was a very evangelical church. So I think I had a good mixture of some higher church things with some lower church things as well. Yeah. And I feel very blessed for so many people who are, my Sunday school teachers and everybody who poured into me.
Yeah, that's really amazing that you can recall to being 3 or 3.5 and the perceptiveness of that question at such a young age.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think it's mostly God just put something in my heart, and everybody. My wife's story is she was instrumental in getting her brother to because there was some treat that they would get or something, and so she really wanted. I don't know what it was,
right.
but like and your own story about getting to have Jesus' special meal in church or whatever. So sometimes God can take a thing that we're heading in one direction, God kind of brings us back where we need to be.
Yeah, so people could hear that, right? Your quick snapshot of coming to faith, the family life that you had, supportive, like something that really nurtured faith in you, and think like, wow, man, Evan's got it made. He had a great childhood, but that's not necessarily the case. Like life wasn't always super easy for you. So just tell a little bit more about some of the challenges that you encountered growing up, and specifically how you saw, because like you said, the theme of God's faithfulness, how you saw that through those seasons.
Yeah, I think the foundation that I just described was really important because when it did get really tough, it didn't shake that faith. And I'm very thankful for that. So, my mother, when I was probably about 10 or so, her mother died. And when you're growing up, you just think your family's normal because everybody thinks their family's normal. Well, my mother started to have some memories that started to come back to her at that time of abuse that had happened to her from her mother. And that set her on a long journey dealing with a lot of rough stuff. PTSD, she already had some OCD and some other health challenges. So that threw her for a major loop, and that also impacted the whole family. My sister, as she got a little bit older, also started to have some health challenges. She has epilepsy and OCD, and just navigating that was really tough. And then, my parents having to figure out how to help her, and they didn't always agree. And just my dad was really busy with the church, and he didn't necessarily always deal with the challenges super well. So long story short, they just really were emotionally pulling apart from each other. Ended up getting divorced when I was like a sophomore or junior in high school. And it was really tough. And because a big part of it was that my father was still the pastor, and through the divorce, he ended up not being able to stay at that church anymore. And so that church had literally been my family. People had taken care of me when my parents were away, and just helped raise me. And that was then taken away. And so that was a big challenge. Fortunately, I think it was a little easier on me than my sister because I only had like another year and a half or so to go until I went off to college, where I, had a lot of great Christian relationships that helped me. But I think even into my 20s, still dealing with a lot of it for sure. Another thing I got to get here on the podcast, I decided eventually to go to some counseling. I went to a Christian counselor, and it wasn't in my insurance, so I was paying out of pocket, which really motivated me to take it very seriously and get a lot out of it. And so I always tell people that was one of the best things I did in my 20s, because we all have some stuff that we got to go work through. And I think, through all that, my sister's health has been really rough at times, even suicidality at times. And then I met Amy, at the end of college, and we got married, soon after that. And we tried to help where we could, but sometimes we got dragged into stuff, triangulated and all that, and just learning to navigate that. But I think God's been faithful throughout. And I think looking at it now, everybody's in a pretty good space. My dad's remarried. My mom's very happy and stable. She's with my sister in Annapolis, Maryland. I'm from Maryland originally. Everybody's still active in their church. My sister leads a Bible study and sings in the choir. My mom is on a council at her church that helps the pastor. My dad is now retired, and his wife is also a pastor at United Methodist Church. They're both retired now, and they help out in so many ways at their current church. And I just don't take that for granted. These days, it just seems like you hear stories of people going every which way. I just saw a new chart on the rise of the nuns, right? Less people affiliated with the church. And you can understand why, because some people have faced real hurt in the church. But I think God's faithfulness, not just to me, but to my whole family, that none of us have lost our faith through the challenges that we saw. Yeah,
it's so as a pastor, having kids, and raising them in the church, we were pulling up, this would have been somewhere along the way this fall, we were pulling up for a Sunday morning, and one of my daughters said to me, she's like, "Dad, if you ever leave this church, I will hate you forever." It is just this has been an amazing place for our kids. And to think about my kids, middle school, high school, leaving this community, it would be devastating for them. And so I imagine for you, like that was really, really challenging. You know, you kind of blew past it pretty fast, but like, just tell us a little bit about how you navigated that change, because for somebody who's in ministry, like the church really does become this massive support network of support, engagement, relationships, your social life, your work life, like it's all just kind of wrapped up into one thing. And for that to be pulled away can hurt a lot.
Yeah, I think I can remember some really distinct situations where other adults just made clear that they cared for me and they poured into me just through that time. So my church had hired a youth pastor. I think one of the strains on my parents was also that my dad was the only staff member for a long, long time at our church. And we got to the point where we actually were so big, we had a Saturday night service. We had 3 Sunday services. Oh, wow. And we had like some secretaries, but, it took a long time to hire an official other pastor. And so, he was very busy. But that youth pastor happened to move into our same neighborhood, maybe 3 blocks away from where we lived. And so he hosted a kind of an open Monday night football viewing every Monday night. And so I would usually go to that. I usually watch the first half because it gets too late at night when you're just a kid. But so that was when I was in high school, and there were several other kind of college-age youth leaders that were there. And it wasn't like I was going there bearing my soul every time, but it just was this safe space where I could go, where I felt accepted. And that was really important to me. I also used to go, I don't know if you did any of these things growing up, Brian, but I used to go to Creation Fest in Pennsylvania, which is one of these giant Christian music festivals.
Yeah, definitely.
You camp out. It was tons of fun. And I remember another man from our church, and this was after my parents had split up, that I don't even remember what he was saying, but he just started crying when he was talking to me. And it was just evident to me how much he cared about me, and how sad he was about the situation that had happened with my parents. So even though we did have to leave the church, it wasn't like we were kicked out. Yeah. And so people still cared for not just me, but my whole family in whatever little ways that they could. And that was very important. And then, going to college, I went to Wheaton College, a Christian college, and, I'd grown up in public school the whole time before that. So I made some really good, roommate type friends, but also a few professors that really became mentors. And one, Vincent Baycode, who's still there, I think his parents had been divorced as well. And so, and actually my RA, my freshman year, who was also from Maryland, ironically, his parents were divorced. So I, randomly found, and that's not, at a college like that, it's not as common. And so to find some of those people who like they get it, that was really helpful for me.
Yeah. So would you say that these people being in your life, it sounds like this youth pastor, this other guy from the Creation Fest you mentioned, this professor, like would you say those were moments of God's faithfulness in your life?
Yes.
How do you see the connection between their presence and God's faithfulness in that season?
Yeah. I mean, something that I thought about as I was, preparing for this, Peter is the one, who, like, you were bringing up, who do you say that I am, right? And I forget which gospel it's in, but, like, where else would we go, Lord? You have the words of life. Right. I've always felt that. And I think as hard as things have gotten at times in my family, it's like I don't blame God for those things. And I don't really blame anyone else. I mean, things are just really complicated and messy, and there's intergenerational stuff that nobody has control over. And I think despite the challenges with my parents, they raised me well. And certainly my mother gave me a lot better than what she got from her mother, And so to be inspired and to look at those bright spots and to focus on the people who do care about you and pour into you rather than the negative. And now, and we'll shift into talking about this, I'm sure, like, I feel like it's now my privilege to do the same for the next generation. And that is, I was a history major. The verse that I have as my signature in my school email is Job 8:8, which is like, ask the former generations and learn what they've learned. And I really believe in that. And I really think that's helped me a lot through my challenges, because you got to have a foundation, and that's what the church is there for. And so I definitely feel like God, through his body, through the church, has always been there and has always cared for me. And I've never felt like that door was closed. You know, I think C.S. Lewis, I couldn't probably do this without talking about C.S. Lewis a little bit. In A Grief Observed, after his wife dies of cancer, he talks about this metaphor that he's banging on this locked door and he knows God is on the other side. Yeah. But God's not responding to him right then, but he still knows that God's there. And that's been kind of a helpful metaphor for me, that there's times, yes, where it's the dark night of the soul, but that's not the whole story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, one of the kind of common trends over the last 5+ years, specifically for people like in our generation, is this like deconstruction of our faith. Yeah. And oftentimes many people like point back to like hurt, pain, disillusionment, things that like did not go well in their faith experience growing up. I'm wondering if you have any reflection on that as you've seen different, maybe it's peers from college and just like kind of how you're processing kind of where you're at and what you've seen happen in other people's lives as they've drifted away from the faith.
Yeah, I mean, one example of that, speaking of Creation Fest, I used to enjoy listening to Joshua Harris speak there. That's the I Kiss Dating Goodbye guy, which I actually think I never read that book, which I probably dodged a little bit of a bullet there. Anyway.
Say maybe you're better off.
Yeah, maybe. But he was actually a really good speaker, and he, for a while, was associated with a really big evangelical church in Maryland. I can't remember the name of it. That's now, I think, split up. They had some scandal there. And oh man, all the scandals over these years have broken my heart. Jean Vanier and so many other ones. But, I think it's the main reaction that I have when I hear these folks is just sadness. And I not anger. It's because I do know people who've really been harmed in the church. And I remember when somebody first told me about, I think you preached about this one time. What's his name right now? I can't think of his name. The cursing pastor.
Mark Driscoll.
When somebody first told me about this, my first thought was, this is not going to end well. I mean, it's like sometimes you should know, right? But sometimes you can't know. And I think deconstruction. I definitely have had many friends from college who that's their story. I guess it's hard to describe. I would hope that people might even choose to go to like a really liberal church than just completely turn their back on things. Because better to remain in some way tied to the faith. Because most of these people I know aren't like, well, Jesus isn't good. Jesus is wrong, right? It's other things. It's human trappings that get put on it. And I definitely think my story, you could easily take my story and be like, well, this is why I'm not in the church anymore, right? And I think, I would credit it, again, to God's faithfulness, my parents pouring into me, and these other people not giving up on me. And not that I was rejecting them or anything like that. I was always, a kid who was pretty much on the straight and narrow. But I think it didn't let it turn me bitter. And I guess my main response to all that is ultimately, we're responsible. I mean, if the church isn't a loving place that echoes the gospel, well, then people aren't going to go. And so I don't want to put the blame on anybody else. I think we should look at the speck in our own eye.
It's interesting too that I think of like the two churches that I've served, because there's just, for pastors and pastors' kids, and when you go through hard things, like it's really easy for people to have stories of churches that are not loving and kind and compassionate. But man, the two churches I've served with our family has just been wildly grace-filled. And I think that goes a long way. And I hear people now even coming to our church who have had bad experiences. And I'm not saying our church is perfect, but just the fact that they feel welcomed, they feel accepted, and they feel like I can just be. Like I don't have to perform, I don't have to pretend, I can just be. That goes a long way to try and set an environment for people to ask their questions, to wrestle with their doubts, to share their fears, to express their hurt and their pain, and just to let it all be there. We talk about the church being a hospital and a home. And I guess I wonder if maybe you look back on your experience, and whether you would have used that metaphor back then or not, I don't know, but you would say like, yeah, that was true of like the church that I grew up in.
Definitely. And I think in all those hurts that we go through, what they teach us is that like I can have empathy for people that now I'm in a position to care for. And things like if my life was just kind of cookie cutter, I wouldn't have had those deep understandings of what it's like to go through those things. And it, a lot of people through my life, like, okay, he's the guy with the side part, I know what to expect from him or whatever, right? Like you get to know me a little bit more. And, I used to listen to underground hip hop in high school. Like you wouldn't know. And, sometimes
totally would not
hear,
have guessed.
You're a PK, right? Like I know what to expect from you. You're either going to be the wildly rebellious guy or the, super straight laced guy. Well, probably not either one of those.
Right.
And I think I don't know. Thankful might be. I don't want to be like all glad about the hard things that I've gone through, but like, another story that's I'll try to be quick on it. But I know you used to skateboard, right? So in college, I was able to get a job at this Christian camp a summer in between one of my 2 years in college. And I really wanted to get a job that was for God, not just a job to make money. Yep. The only position they had was as a skateboard counselor at a skate camp there. I'd never skateboarded before. And they said, okay, are you going to be willing to learn? And I said, sure, okay. And, it was a pro who was running it, who used to be in the X Games. And,
wow.
I started to learn, and I ended up dropping it on a half pipe and breaking my right arm really bad. It was the only time I've been in an ambulance in my life. And I was, on workman's comp, sitting on the couch the rest of the summer trying to recover. It was very painful. But that's the sort of story that at the time you're like, God, why? Yeah. But now I know if somebody has a serious illness or a serious injury, I know how much it impacts you psychologically and mentally because I went through that. Yeah. I mean, I have so many students that I've worked with over the years as a teacher, as a coach, who their parents are divorced. I know what that's like. And if you don't have those experiences, it's harder to truly enter into those things. And again, it's the power of your story. I say this to my students all the time. People can reject message. They can't reject your story and just out of hand. And if you are genuine and if you will share that, like, you may think differently, but I believe God was with me through that. That's a powerful message for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So give one other example as you look back on those years of where and how you saw God's faithfulness, and then we'll move to start talking about like what life is like today.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I haven't talked as much about kind of my adult years. So certainly me and my wife, I'll be really remiss if I didn't bring that up. We met my senior year. So somehow we were both history majors, and it was not a big department, but we really didn't meet until later on. We were history nerds together in the History Honor Society. And we had, either of you in the room read a Mark Noll book before? We had a Mark Noll class where we actually got to know each other. He is a rock star in my opinion. So she had, her parents are not divorced, but a lot of similarities in her upbringing. And I think we really just could connect and understand each other very quickly in that way. And I think she's always been very, very supportive of me, loved my family, despite, sometimes it being challenging to try to, you try to help, but then you just get triangulated sometimes, and that's really tough. But, and I think we both, right out of college, we ended up in Washington, D.C., where we were doing grad school and working, and we ended up going to an Anglican church there. And we'd started kind of going to Anglican churches in college, but then we were in one main one for our 7 years in DC. And that was sort of like college 2.0. When you don't have kids yet and you just have extra time that you can build those relationships. Totally. So we built the sort of relationships there that were very supportive to us in those still very formative young adult years. And those friendships I see very much as God's faithfulness in our lives, and two of those couples are the godparents to our kids now. And so just, there's no season of my life where I look at it and say, well, that was really a barren place and God wasn't there. I can look at every single season and say God was with us, watching out for us. And, we haven't been in Anglican church, since we've been here, which is partly we're kind of sad because we love that stuff. But we do liturgy at home and stuff, and that's fine. But unfortunately, there's been a lot of scandals in the ACNA in the years since we left, and we didn't leave for any of that reason at all. But even there, I felt like God was saying to us, I'm going to put you on the sidelines of that because we know a lot of people on both sides of that. And it's we know some relationships that have been broken forever through that. And it's really sad for us. But I think God was saying, I'm going to take you here, and that's not your battle to fight right now. And it is somebody else's, and that's really important. But God has always remained faithful.
Yeah, that's amazing. So as you look at life today, we're really wanting to help people like have vision and imagination for God being at work in their life in real time. I think there's something significant about looking back on your life story, but there's also something really powerful about identifying how God is at work today. So maybe you could share a couple things around where you see God at work in your life in this season.
It's interesting. I think the sort of thing that you do, at Wheaton College when you're riding the train in to go to the Art Institute together or whatever is you have your Arminian versus Calvinism debate, right? That's just what you do. So it's not to say that like we overcame a lot of the theology or faith hurdles younger, and so it's all over or anything like that. Those conversations are still good to have, but I just feel very settled in my beliefs, and I'm not someone who likes a lot of change. Neither does my wife. So we're if you become friends with us, you're stuck with us, right? And I hope to say the same thing about this church that we're going to be here. It's my 10th year at my school that I'm at. I want to be faithful to the places that I am. So I think I only say that because it sets us up to be in a position where we can give back. We're settled, and it's not to say everything's easy. Life is hard. You got to do a lot of hard work, but we very much have, since we've been married, we've been leaders of many different small groups at the churches we've been at, and just pouring into the body of Christ in that way. We've done all, ministry on Sunday mornings as well. And then in more recent years, having our own kids and pouring into that. So Jackson's 9 and Lily's 6. But then also just, I wouldn't call it youth ministry per se. I'm not doing quite what Monty's doing, but I have ended up doing a lot of work with youth in my adult life. So this is my 10th year at my current school. I teach at a Christian school out in Pewaukee. And so I have 8th grade homeroom every day, Bible, Christian values, leadership development time. And I get to share a lot of these little stories about my life that I'm hoping make it much more relevant to them than just hearing the Bible story again, but like, let's connect it to real life. And let's work on how you can really make this your own. Because a lot of my students, are in fairly cultural Christianity homes where it's not really their own.
Right.
And so getting them to take that on, encouraging them to join their youth group and go on a missions trip and things like that. And soccer coaching is another way. I've been coaching for almost 10 years now. And I found it so rewarding to work with young people. They're so receptive. Sometimes I think they're easier to talk to than adults. And yes, some people give me the whole, oh, you work with middle schoolers, you're a saint. I'm like, no, they're great. They're great. Because they're an open book and their minds are open. They haven't decided what they do and don't like yet. And I really like that. So I just feel like all those experiences I had before, I can think of all those people who poured into me. And I just want to do the same thing for the next generation.
Yeah. How are you seeing God lead you into those moments in terms of whether it's conversations in the classroom or out on the soccer field? Like what ways are you finding God at work in those places?
Yeah, it's different at my school, and we also lead the neighborhood community, which is more to adults, although there's kids in the community as well. And then soccer coaching, that's a secular environment, so it depends on the situation. And I think is it St. Francis who says something like preach with actions and if necessary with words. I'm not getting it quite right, something like that. And just treating people the right way, holding to your principles, no matter what. You don't have to give people a lecture, but I say to my students all the time, like, if you do, what the gospel says to do, it will be shocking to people, and they will notice, and they will ask, And I sometimes just want to be like Christians, you should read through the Sermon on the Mount at least once a year, like. Jesus actually said that. Like, he said that. He said to love your enemies, and. Right. You can't just ignore that. Yeah. And so I think oftentimes it's just a matter of, it can also be in really subtle ways. Like I was just talking to Mike Rose earlier this morning. As a parent, your kids' activities, I know you know this, they just start to take up more and more and more time. And it's not like you set out to be like, we're going to do all the activities in the whole world, but like it just creeps in.
Totally.
And I think another real, to be countercultural is to be like, no, we're not doing that thing on Sunday morning.
Right.
We're taking this family time.
Yeah.
And so just to remain faithful in those things, you don't have to fight the culture wars over it. Just don't give in, and people will notice and they will ask you.
Yeah. So as you think about, so you're reflecting back, you see God's faithfulness in your own life, both in your younger years through college and even now. How would you encourage somebody to identify God's faithfulness? Like if somebody's struggling to like say, I really see God's faithfulness, I'm struggling to see it. How would you coach them to be able to be aware of it?
That's a really good question. I think it's going to really depend on different people. I think you got to start by having close Christian relationships. I've been in triads at different times in my adult life, kind of accountability groups. It might be other couples that you're really close with. And I think especially, I was saying to Monty, like, I don't remember my dad having a lot of friendships. I've started this board game group at Meadowbrook, and that's been a great way to get to know guys because you're fixing your house, you're taking care of your kids, you're doing your job, you've got something going on all the time. And so, and that's just like someone in my stage of life, but whatever stage in life you're in, there's something that is trying to pull you away from having solid, maintained Christian relationships. You've got to have those in order to be able to see God's faithfulness. You got to have people who will point it out. I mean, just like, if I'm colorblind. So if I try to leave the house in the morning with my tie not matching at all, my wife will thankfully tell me, like that's a metaphor for what we all need in our life. We can't see it in our own selves. We need other people around us who will speak up, but who will also encourage us. So I think that's the first thing I would say is you just can't do it on your own. It's too hard. And you will get depressed if you're trying to do it all on your own. So, and it's a give and take, right? Like you give to relationships, and if it's a real relationship, it gives back just as much to you. Right. And there's a place for mission where you're giving and not, expecting to receive in return. But you need to have those Christian relationships where you're receiving in return. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so as we kind of start to wind our conversation down, how is it that you are trying to do this with your own family? Like, how are you trying to raise your kids in a way to help them see the legacy of God's faithfulness in your life in hopes that it will carry on in theirs? Yeah, that's a great question. One simple thing we do, I was just talking to Justin before, every morning at breakfast, we read the Bible, and I'm becoming a connoisseur of all the best kids' Bibles this way, and it's awesome. I love it. We're reading through the one right now that was given to us by church that aligns with the Sunday school curriculum, and that's working out great. We do, every kind of special holiday, we will do our own home church liturgy. And even like the Ash Wednesday service coming up, we'd love to go. It's a little bit late for us as early as we got to get up and get going, but we'll do something at home. And so we just try to find ways to make it fun and engaging for our kids and not something that is just, sometimes I've gone to higher churches of different stripes where like, I listen to the words of the liturgy and it's like, this is beautiful. These are the words of life, guys. This is, and you look around, it's like, no one's getting this, and I think it could be the same way at a really low church as well. You could have a church that's, speaking in tongues where people are it's just an act. I mean, it doesn't matter. Any church can lose the true heart of the faith. So I think you have to be genuine with your kids. You have to just build it in and make it fun. I mean, we try to we dress up, we do dramas, we use little like peg people, and my wife will like act it out with like wooden blocks and stuff. We have like books that we'll do for Lent together. There's all kinds of ways, and not that I'm here to plug my wife's blog, but she puts all these up on her blog. That's and she makes stuff that are for families that I think would be easy for any family to do.
That's awesome. Well, we've really appreciated you coming and spending some time with us and just sharing a bit of your story and talking about how God's leading you in this season of your life. And so for those of you who are, tuning in and you're wrestling through where is God's faithfulness in my life? I think to your point, getting connected in community, moving further into community rather than away from it is a great way to, keep exercising the ability to see God's work in your life. So thanks so much for spending the time with us today. And for those of you who are listening, hopefully this was a encouraging conversation for you as well.